to the class for future profilers. We are really excited and happy to have you, and happy that you want to work with forensics and profiling in the future. In this opportunity, I will be talking about Martin Johnson, the international monster. This investigation has been happening for many years, and it is still very relevant, and it set a precedent for new serial killing cases, and therefore is very important. We will be talking about Martin Johnson. He was born in 1960 and he passed away in 2015. He was a Colombian American serial killer in South America. His full name was Martin Johnson. He was born in Colombia in South America, but he has an American surname because his parents were American. His moniker is the International Killer. He was best known as the International Killer or the International Monster. This name came to be because he traveled to different South American countries to find his victims. He realized that he would be able to rape and kill more girls if he traveled to other countries in South America, even though he was born in Colombia. His early childhood was very complicated. He was born in 1916 in Bogota, Colombia, and he was the son of an American drug merchant and a prostitute. His father was a member. He was actually one of the leaders of the Colombian American drug ring, one of the most famous ones. And due to his work with them and their dangerous activities, he was killed. It was actually during his capture. When his father died, his mother was already pregnant with him and his twin brother, who died at birth. That was very hard for his mother, but he was able to make it out alive, and he was actually born as a healthy child. He was the 7th child in a family of 8. He was not the last child, but he was one of the youngest ones. His brothers and sisters were much older than him, so they were, by the time he was born, they were almost already out of his house. It was reported that his mother was very abusive towards him and his siblings, the ones left in his house. She worked as a prostitute and she struggled with mental health issues and drugs. Because his father was a drug merchant, he would always have drugs at his house, and therefore his mother would become a user as well. And she worked as a prostitute because she didn't have any formal education, and when his father died, things became harder for her. She was assaulted and abused by her clients. She worked at her own house, and her children were witnesses of the many things that happened to her. It was reported that Johnson used to wet the bed, one of the common behaviors, or said to be common behaviors, of serial killers as children. Martin Johnson was kicked out of his house by his mother after being caught with his father's drugs. She was a user, but she apparently did not let her children use drugs. And when she found out that Johnson was using drugs, she did not want him in her house. However, she got one of her clients to take him to an orphanage, saying that he was a homeless orphan kid, and the authorities never confirmed this. They just took him in. Unfortunately, he was sexually abused at the orphanage where he stayed. The people who worked there would sexually assault children and abuse them. It was a common occurrence there, and many children went through the same thing. He stayed in this orphanage for around 2 years, and as soon as he turned 12 years old, he decided to run away. He decided that it was better to live on the streets than in the orphanage where he was being constantly abused. However, he was assaulted by different people while living on the streets. Also, while living there with other homeless people, he learned to rob and sexually assault girls. He didn't actually start then, but he witnessed other people raping girls and women, and he was raped himself. So he learned some of these behaviors. Some physical characteristics of him are that he was a male. He was a white male. Both of his parents were white Americans. His height was around 1.78 centimeters, which is considered tall height. He was told among the people on the streets and among Latin Americans as well. He was 40 years old when he was captured and 55 when he died. His health was not in the best condition. He hadn't treated wounds from when he was a child and he was abused. He was found with a broken nose. When he was captured, he had a broken nose and different scars on his body. And a psychological fact about him is that he was an impulsive man, and it was hard for him to stand still. He was always trying to move. Johnson targeted and killed young girls from low-income families and neighborhoods. Here we can see that these are some of the pictures that we took of one of his victims' neighborhoods. He would always walk around these neighborhoods to find his victims, and he only targeted girls from ages 12 to 14. He was initially charged with 18 murders, but it was ultimately found that he had killed around 50 South American girls in different countries. Johnson got rid of the bodies by abandoning them in these low-income areas. His methods of killing were harsh, but this will help us this will help us with the profiling later, so let's pay attention to these details. He would walk around the neighborhoods interacting with the neighbors. Remember that these were low-income areas where people did not have TVs or any sort of game. They would go out for different activities, even for washing clothes. They would have like a neighborhood water source where they would do different activities. So it was easy to communicate with them. It was easy to interact with them. He would look for girls with difficult family situations, and it wasn't hard to spot them because girls in these neighborhoods would be outside trying to work in different things to provide for their families. They would be outside because their parents kicked them out, and so it wasn't hard for him to find his victims. Of course, he would have to ask for the age because he was very strict about that, but it wasn't hard to find his victims. Then he would talk to them, try to interact with them, try to empathize with them, and convince them to run away with him. He would tell them that he could help their situation, that he could help them become better and escape their families. After kidnapping the girls, he would take them to abandoned city areas where he would sexually assault them and murder them. He was a violent man. He was brutal. He was lethal. Johnson's main method for killing was strangulation, but some of his victims were brutally beaten to death even before he could strangulate them. That's how violent he was. And in an analysis of Turco Gabbard, indicated that 67% of lost serial killers used hands-on methods. So he didn't use any weapons. He used his hands, and he was lethal. He would be brutal. He would beat his victims in different parts of their body and sexually abuse them. His first murder happened in 1981. Although he witnessed rape and violence since he was young, he didn't actually rape someone until 1981. This is when he raped a 13-year-old girl at a party in Bogota, and he suffocated her to death in a bathroom. Then he fled the scene, and because these parties were full of people, no one really noticed that what had happened until the next morning, and the marks of his fingers did not help him get caught. Authorities were actually not very professional, and this case was unresolved. His progression to killing, it all started in 1960, when he was born in an abusive family. And this will help us understand some of his motivations. So let's pay attention to this. He was born in an abusive family, and in 1970 he was raped for the first time. He was taken to an orphanage where he continued to be sexually assaulted. He was actually raped by the people who were supposed to take them to the orphanage. And in the orphanage, he was also raped, sexually assaulted, and abused. So this left a huge mark on his personality and his whole being. In 1972, he was sexually assaulted by a homeless man right after he had left the orphanage. So he had fled the orphanage in order to escape that, but he was also sexually assaulted. In 1980, he was arrested for the first time for robbery. While he was living on the streets, he learned to rob people and to commit other crimes. But mainly robbery, because he needed to survive with something. He was actually very poor as well. In 1981, that's when he committed his first murder, a 13-year-old girl. As I already mentioned, in 1983, he traveled around South America to continue to rape girls and kill them. This is actually when he realized that he would not get away with another sexual assault, so he decided to leave the country where he was born. And because Latin American countries are so close together, he decided that it would be wise for him not to get caught in this way. And he decided that he would travel to different parts of South America in order to commit his crimes. And he did so for 2 years until Bolivian authorities caught him abandoning one of his victims' bodies in 1985. He didn't realize it was late at night, and he didn't realize that he would get caught, but he got caught. However, in 1992, authorities realized that they couldn't keep him anymore, and he went back to Colombia, where he kept murdering girls because he wasn't stopped in Bolivia. Now we will talk about his paraphilias. He is actually considered a pedophile. He was sexually aroused by sexual fantasies, sexual urges with of sexual relations with children. And this is something that he developed when he was young, as a teenager. And we will understand why in just a moment. He did suffer from mental illness when he was captured. He was tested for medical conditions and psychological conditions, and he was found to have antisocial personality disorder. He had no regard for rules. He clearly had been robbing people since he was young. He sexually assaulted girls and did not respect women. He did not respect social norms or private property. And he had depressive episodes. He was examined after being captured, and it was discovered that throughout his life he tried to make a life for himself, but his depressive episodes would always send him back to his bad mentality and his depression. His episodes would not help him succeed, and he would fail in his attempts of making something out of himself. We will talk about his motivations for killing. We found them to be his motivations were related to power and control. He decided he had no respect for women and he had a need to have control over something in his life, and this is why he looked for younger girls, because he realized that he could easily manipulate them and make them do what he wanted them to do. He when he was captured, he reported enjoying the feeling of having power over these girls and making them suffer and just being able to control them. Sexual gratification, he was, as I mentioned, sexually aroused by sexual relations with children. Since he was raped from a very young age, he had a very distorted perception of sex, and he actually learned unusual behaviors, sexual behaviors that led him to have urges and unusual sexual fantasies. And both of these motivations are supported by the strain theory. He experienced struggle and he experienced pain and violence and abuse since he was very young. His life was not easy. His mother abused him. He was very poor. And although he learned some of the behavior that he performed when he was older, he most of his frustrations and feelings were coming from his experience as a child and as a teenager and as an adult. The profiling process happened with Professor Kevin Dahl and Michael Brooks. They are both specialists in the forensics area. We did a victim profiling first because Johnson did not have any particular signatures or special treatment towards his victims. As I mentioned before, he was very brutal, he was lethal, and he would violently rape his victims. And all of his victims had marks all over their bodies, but it seems like the marks were not intentionally put or they were not intentionally drawn or just put on the body. However, his intentions were to hurt his victims. He, as I mentioned before, he always killed girls from ages 12 to 14. He made sure that all of his victims were around this age, and he also made sure that his victims were from poor neighborhoods. So we used this evidence to communicate. We used this information to capture him. We communicated this information to different authorities in the poorest areas of Latin America, in different countries, and we were able to find him. This is also used to study his case and other cases. that have a similar pattern. And we also use DNA profiling. We use the blood stains on his victims to find him. We, at some point in this investigation, we were not sure of what he looked like, or what Johnson looked like. And we did have many suspects who could have been capable of killing these girls, and therefore we used his DNA, the DNA on his victims' bodies that were found at some point. We used that DNA in order to match with his identity, and we were able to find what he looked like. None of his victims survived, so both of these methods actually worked for us really well. His capture happened in 1995, and he was sent to trial that same year. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but he did not complete his sentence because he died in 2015. These are my references. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you have a bright future as a profiler, and forensics is a great field. Thank you.